Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Be Curious LATES event, which is based on our amazing bodies. So my name is Catherine McGuinness, and I'm going to be your host for tonight. So this evening's event is a part of Be Curious, which is the University of Leeds annual research open event, where we invite you to take a peek at what goes on inside our university. So as you might know, we've been going live with Be Curious activities and events, and we're exploring everything from the world-leading to the wondrous. And we're finishing off tomorrow, which is the 15th of July. So make sure that you check out tomorrow's event programme after this evening's event. So we have hands-on activities for families after school at 4 p.m. and a late event for adults at exactly the same time tomorrow night. But on with tonight. So we're going to be exploring themes around our amazing bodies with the help of a fantastic lineup of 3 of our current University of Leeds researchers. So each speaker is going to have 10 minutes to tell you about an area of their research. And then after that, we want to see questions from you. So if you have a question for any of our speakers, just post it in the chat, which should be to your right if you're viewing the event on YouTube. And if you're not, then we would recommend just clicking the option to view the event in YouTube to make sure you get the best possible experience for this evening. So our moderator team is going to be keeping an eye on the chat and would love to say hello to some of you this evening. So give it a try, just say hello in the comments if you can and let us know where you're tuning in from. But on with tonight, our speakers are Dr. Peter Culmer, Rachel Jablonski and Dr. Kristine Beaulieu. And first up, we are going to be welcoming Pete, so over to you. Oh, I think we have a mute.
That's fair. Oh dear, I've been doing this long enough, I should know. So sorry. Hi everyone, my name's Pete Culmer, and I'm an engineer at the University of Leeds. I work in mechanical engineering, and the work I do, the research I do, is linked to healthcare. So I try and apply the engineering skills that I've got to healthcare challenges. I don't do this alone, so I'm going to talk to you today about the stresses and strains of walking. And in this work that we do, I'm part of a big team with lots of different disciplines. I work with engineers like my colleague Claire, clinicians like Mr. David Russell, Heidi Siddle, who are working in the healthcare service, but also have links to the university. And we have researchers, Sarah Crossland, who's a PhD student doing engineering, but who's a podiatrist as well. So she's a foot specialist. And Alex Jones, who's a trainee surgeon and is also doing an MD with us. So we put together all these different skills to tackle the challenges that we'd like to address. And what we're going to talk about today is the foot. It's pretty incredible as a piece of your body in terms of what it can do and what it does every single day. So you can see here an animation of a person's foot and the bones, and then you can see the ligaments and the tendons, all of these things working together and allowing your body to move along and allowing your foot to support your body. So it can propel you along, it can do running, jumping, and what we do is we describe the behavior of the foot as it goes through different motions, in particular in walking, as something called the gait cycle. So you can see here, from the first point of contact, when your heel strikes the ground, you transfer load all the way through your foot. So as your foot flattens, and then you go to something called toe off, which is at this point here, where the toes of your foot push you forwards, and then your other foot on the other side would come through and take the next step. So it does this job every day. And if you've got a Fitbit, you might count how many steps you've done that particular day, in the thousands, I'm fairly sure. But unfortunately, there are things that can go wrong with the foot. And often they're not very widely known. So diabetic foot ulceration is one of the biggest causes of, I guess, challenges to foot health, as we say, in the UK and worldwide. Basically, this occurs because in diabetes, there are changes that happen to the extremities of the body. The blood supply becomes poorer to those extremities, and also the nerve supply to those extremities becomes poorer as well. So it means that people are at risk of developing an ulcer. And you can think of that as like quite a severe blister, something that gets worse and worse and worse to the point where you lose skin layers. And the challenge is here, the double whammy, if you like, is because people have nervous damage in their feet or they develop it over time, they're unlikely to be able to feel it as well. So the damage occurs and they can't feel it. And because they have a poorer blood supply, it takes longer to heal. So what we really want to do, what our ambition is to detect this before it happens and to be able to help those people avoid having these ulcers, which might cause them significant healthcare problems in their long-term life. It's a huge problem, as you can imagine, not just personally, but in terms of treating it. It's estimated to cost over £1 billion a year to the NHS alone. So if you took at that around the world, you can understand what a huge problem this is, what a huge challenge. And it affects a significant number of people. Just under 5 million in the UK live with diabetes, and a significant number of those might face these kind of challenges. So it's a really significant challenge. Now, there are things that can be done to help. And the biggest thing that can be done to help is wearing sensible shoes. I'm a parent, and I kind of think that it's the sort of thing that we say to kids all the time. You know, you need to be careful about what you wear, how you treat your feet, do your laces up. It does all make sense, though. If you support your foot, then you're much less likely to have blisters or, in this case, ulceration. But as things get maybe more challenging, if you've previously developed ulcers, you might have to look at these specialist pieces of footwear, like a pressure offloading boot. You might have seen footballers wear these if they fracture their fracture bones in their feet, or these special rocker shoes which help transmit the load a bit better. But the challenge is that we need to understand when to intervene and when to use these kind of things. So what we need to do, what our challenge is to help clinicians, help the healthcare professionals who deal with this every day, understand what's happening with a person's foot and understand when they need to do something about it. Because clearly people don't want to be wearing huge supportive shoes all the time. They want to lead as normal life as possible. So we need to help these healthcare professionals, first of all, measure what's going on a person's foot and then predict when they're likely to have problems so that we can step in and make amends. And what you can see here is what we call a pressure map. So if you imagine the red parts here are where there's high load on the foot, so lots of pressure, and the blue regions are where there's less load. So you can see here the big toe and the heel, they're areas where there's high load. One thing we're trying to do is not just measure the load, but also what we call the shear. So the shear stress is like the rubbing backwards and forwards or side to side. So if you didn't do your shoelaces up very well and you went running, then you would get rubbing in your shoe. So you'd have your foot move backwards and forwards in the shoe, and that movement of the skin against the shoe would cause ulceration or blisters to occur. So what we want to try and do as engineers is understand how we can measure that. So it's quite a challenging area. And what we're doing is looking at different ways that we can do this. One way that we've got and that we've been developing is to develop a special insole that can be placed inside the shoe, and it has 64 sensors on it. And those sensors, each of them can measure pressure and forwards and backwards and side to side shear pressures. So they can measure what's happening on the surface of the foot. And our aim is then to provide that to somebody and allow them to wear it and record the steps that they're taking, and then to show the clinician a special map like this of the person's foot so they can identify if any of these regions are too high, for example, then they might design a special insole that could help support the load on the person's foot. So that's the kind of electronic side of what we're doing. Instrumentation, that's the kind of thing that we do as engineers. So that was our idea, and here you can see the actual system. So this is the insole. This is a circuit board that we designed that basically just captures the information from the insole, records it so that we can then send it across to a computer. And this is the kind of information that we can get from that system. And we're pretty pleased with this. It's pretty good, but it's expensive and it's quite complex. So we're also looking at other ways that we can understand this situation. In particular, ways that might be able to be used in a clinical setting, because these being very expensive, it might take a long time, or it might cost too much for some hospitals to be able to afford that kind of healthcare. So we have a PhD student, Sarah, who's been looking at different ways that we can address this. And she's been studying the feet by applying a special pattern across the surface of the foot. So the pattern is a series of speckles, and we ask people then to step on a walkway. You can just see this glass walkway here with a camera underneath. And as the person steps on that walkway, we have a camera underneath, and the camera looks at the dots. And as the person pushes load through their foot, the dots will move, and they will tell us how the skin is stretching. So that tells us about how these shear forces occur on the sole of the foot. And it's a really interesting picture that you get. So you can see here the view from the camera, somebody stepping on that glass plate, and you can see in the same way the red regions are when we get areas of high strain. So that's the stretch. If you take a biro and dot some dots on your hand and then hold a glass or stretch your hand, open and close it, you'll see the dots move closer and further away from each other. That's exactly what we're doing here. So we're using some computer software to look at all these dots, all these speckle patterns, and then tell us which regions have got lots of stretch and which regions have got less stretch. And by doing that, we can build a map of the foot and hopefully then be able to tell clinicians if there's any areas that are a cause of concern. So that's two ways that we've looked at measuring what's happening on the surface of the foot. And our ambition is to really provide clinicians, healthcare professionals, with better information so that they can hopefully support the patients that they see every day better, but also so that the patients themselves, people with these conditions, can work independently to manage their own conditions. So we don't just want people to have to rely on coming into clinical settings. Maybe people want to be able to do some of this in their own home as well. So it allows patients to be a bit more independent as well. That's what we hope in the future. So hopefully today I've kind of given you a very brief snapshot of how engineers and clinicians can work together as a team. It's only by working as a team that we can do this kind of work. We need all these different skill sets together. And we feel, and we're slightly biased, but engineering technology can provide solutions to some of these healthcare challenges. So hopefully that can go on in the future to improve the quality of life for people with these kind of conditions. So I think that is the end of my 10 minutes, just about. I hope I've kept to time there, Catherine.
I think so. I think it was perfectly.
Excellent. So we'd be very happy to answer any questions and provide other pointers. There's a longer version of this talk actually online as well, if you're interested, where I'm completely overshadowed by my PhD student, Sarah, who gives an excellent talk in a bit more detail about the foot.
I have to say, I don't think I've ever thought as much about my feet as I have in the past 10 minutes. So yeah, I had perhaps a very silly question, but I was wondering, so the patterns, are they the same when we're running as when we're walking, or do they change depending on speed?
Yeah, they do change. It's a really good question. So we're just starting to understand, but we think that depending on, if you can imagine somebody's weight, that may change things slightly. But if you imagine going up or down a slope, then if you're walking down a slope, say down a hill, then the patterns of strain will be different on the person's foot. So you might expect to have more strain at the front of the foot than at the back of the foot. So yeah, it does absolutely change it. And depending on different bits of footwear as well, that can change the pattern of the support that's provided to the foot.
I'm guessing stilettos are not a good idea.
The thing is, we always find this with, so we do, we work with patients in this and healthcare professionals, and everybody says, even if they know the best advice, they're still drawn to those footwear that they kind of like I think it's human nature, isn't it?
So,
I've just seen. I think I've just seen in the comments, Christopher Pringle. Yeah. So I think diabetes increases your risk of ulceration, but yeah, it's as the comment actually underneath says, it can occur in other people too. So diabetes really increases your risk because of the change in the blood supply, and also the fact that because of your nervous system changes, it's harder to feel when it's occurring.
interesting. And just to let you know, that link is up as well in the comments.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
For Sarah's talk. And I think now we would be happy to pass over to our second speaker. That's quite right. So
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for taking your time. So yes, next up we have Rachel.
Hi everyone.
Hi there.
Hiya. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. My name's Rachel Jablonski and I am a PhD student based at the University of Leeds. During this presentation, I was hoping to share with you all some of the research that I'm doing in Leeds, looking at improving facial prostheses construction using digital technology. So during the next 10 minutes, I intend to cover what a facial prosthesis is and what we do at the moment to make these prostheses, what the opportunities are for improvement, and some of the research that I'm involved with. So there are lots of different reasons why people might need a facial prosthesis. For example, they might be born without a facial part, or they might have had an accident. But the particular group of people that I'm working with are those people that have had head and neck cancer. But I appreciate this research will kind of apply more widely as well. So a bit of background about head and neck cancer. So head and neck cancer is an important condition. It's the 8th most common cancer in the UK, and about 12,000 people are diagnosed with it each year. It's been increasing over recent decades.
Hi there, Rachel. Just to let you know, there's been a slight problem with your slides.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. It stopped sharing for some reason. I apologise.
Can
you see that now?
Right.
No problem. I'll just start from here. So yeah, I was saying that head and neck cancer is increasing in recent years, and about half of people will go on to have some form of major surgery. And this can really impact on a person's quality of life, their well-being, their appearance and their function, and especially for those people who have a facial part removed during their surgery. Okay, so what is a facial prosthesis? Well, facial prosthesis is a common way of treating people with a missing facial part, and this might be to replace something like a missing eye, an ear, or a nose. And these are silicone bespoke devices that are made for individual people, and they'll wear them during the day and then take them off at night time. So how do we make these facial prostheses? So the first visit when a patient comes to the hospital will be for a facial mould. And here we've taken a mould of a missing ear in order to make a prosthesis. They then have the mould poured up into a model, and here we have the model of the missing ear with some implants in place which are used to help stick the prosthesis down. Then a really skilled member of staff will spend a lot of time handcrafting the missing facial part. And once it's been tried on the patient and they're happy with it, it will be converted into a silicone prosthesis like this, and then hand finished and painted to make it look as good as possible and blend in nicely. So what are the problems with the current processes? Well, firstly, the impressions can be a little bit inaccurate. So the tissues are all compressible, and if the impression is quite heavy, it might distort the tissues and mean the prosthesis doesn't fit particularly well in some areas. Secondly, it's quite a labour-intensive process, so it might take 6-7 visits for a prosthesis to be made, which has quite a big burden on patients. It's quite time-consuming for a clinician to carry out, and to handcraft one of these prostheses, it can take many hours. And they have to be replaced regularly on a 6 to 18 month basis. So patients have to come back time and time again for this to be done. Estimates suggest that about 2,000 new or replacement prostheses are made each year in the UK, although we think this is probably an underestimate. So what do our patients want to change? Well, we did a lot of work with our patient group and asked them what key things they wanted to focus on. The first thing was that they didn't like having that facial impression taken, and they wanted to try and eliminate that if possible. And here we've got a photograph of somebody having a full facial impression taken, which can be quite claustrophobic and uncomfortable for people to have done. The second thing that they wanted to change was that they wanted to look a bit more like they did before their surgery, so to gain their own distinctive facial features back. And then the third thing was that they wanted to get the prosthesis much quicker after their surgery so they could return to work and socialising much faster. So how could we improve this? Well, we could introduce digital technology, and there are 3 main places where we could do this. So firstly, we could scan patients, and this would mean they wouldn't need to have that impression. Secondly, we could design the prosthesis digitally instead of spending all that time handcrafting the wax pattern. And thirdly, we could use some 3D printing technology to try and speed up the process and cut down on those appointments. So I'm just going to go into a bit more detail about some of these. So facial scanning, there are lots of different techniques that have been used there in the literature. And there are many benefits of this. So it might be more comfortable for people, it's non-contact, and potentially much more quicker and efficient for them. A little while ago, I did a lot of research to compare these different systems, and I looked at these very expensive stereophotogrammetry equipments, which were very quick, but they're not that widely available. So things that were more affordable, like a laser scanner, which would take more time to take a scan, to something in the middle, like a structured light scanner, which is much more portable and accurate, although not quite as quick as those stereophotogrammetry kits. So this led us to purchase this blue structured light scanner here, and this photograph uses some funding from Leeds Hospital's charity. And here's an example of a volunteer that we've recruited into a recent study. And you can see if it moves. Oh, sorry, I think it should move. There we go. We can see here how accurate these scans are, how detailed they are, and the fact that this person has been able to have this scan taken. They're really relaxed and they've been able to keep their eyes open, which is really helpful if we wanted to design an orbital or eye prosthesis. So the next step of the puzzle is to look at computer-aided design. And again, there are many different methods available. So some people might just sculpt their prosthesis digitally, just like they would by hand, but instead using computers. Others might use databases of nose or ear models, or use a friend or a family to scan instead. And some people might flip their facial features. So if it's a missing facial part just affecting one side of the face, then that's something that might be possible too. So the real benefits of computer-aided design would mean that we can save time on doing the basic design to start off with, and then we can refine it later, and then the patient can input in real time. And also we get the benefit of being able to store the files digitally and reuse them. So at the moment, as I say, I've recruited a number of volunteers to have a facial scan taken, and I've superimposed a missing facial part over these patients' faces. And I'm now in the middle of a study where I'm asking different systems to reconstruct it, and then I can look at exactly how quick and efficient and accurate some of these systems are. So one of the really interesting techniques that we're working on in Leeds is called a 3D morphable model, and this lets us reconstruct faces using 2D or 3D images. A couple of years ago, I was working as part of a team, and we built the Leeds face model, where we basically scanned hundreds of people in Leeds of different ages and different ethnicities, so that we could train the 3D morphable model on exactly what different variations in facial shape would look like. We can now use this technology to be able to reconstruct a missing facial feature by asking the morphable model to ignore the missing facial part and instead reconstruct the facial features by looking at the rest of the face. And then there's opportunities to introduce photographs into this, which have been marked up with the key points, just to refine that and make that look a little bit more like the patient's own natural nose. And then the final step of the process would be looking at 3D printing technology, which is becoming more and more commonplace these days. The benefits of this is that we could reduce the number of appointments and stages required. We could reduce the burden on patients needing to come into the hospital so regularly, and also reduce the burden on the healthcare staff. And if we could get a process that was very quick and efficient, then we might be able to rehabilitate patients much quicker after their surgery. So at the moment, we're investigating different ways of being able to use 3D printing technology in facial prosthesis manufacture. So in an ideal scenario, we would directly print in silicon, but unfortunately, this technology isn't quite ready yet because it can't print in thin enough layers. So instead, we're looking at things like printing replicas of the prosthesis, for example, in waxes or other materials that could then be turned into a prosthesis, or alternatively, using negative molds, which can be used for pouring up silicon and producing the prosthesis. So just to summarise, my overall PhD project has these 3 key steps. Prior to this work, I did a lot of work investigating what had been done previously by other researchers. This step, stage 2, is what I'm working on at the moment in terms of investigating what's best to use on healthy volunteers without any facial defects, and then we can introduce this later into the real patient group. And then stage 3 will be coming hopefully later on this year, when we'll introduce a small trial where patients will be provided with 2 new facial prostheses, one made the traditional way and one made using digital techniques. And we can ask patients which one feels better for them, which processes do they like the best, and also look at things from a health economic perspective. So that means looking at what are the costs and benefits to the hospital service of this technology. So I hope I've been able to explain a little bit about the current processes and what facial prostheses are, look at some of the opportunities out there for improvement, and look at some of the research that we're involved with. So thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate you all attending on such a sunny evening. And also thank you to all my PhD supervisors, the team that I work with, and the funders who make this work possible.
Thanks so much, Rachel. That was really interesting. And we have an interesting comment actually from Alwyn from during your talk. So they've said, presumably, do you need to take the impression before surgery? Or is it, it does depend on the surgery?
Yeah, so it depends really. There's from the diagnosis of the cancer to them getting the treatment, sometimes that window can be very short. So if you could scan a person before their surgery or take an impression before the surgery, that can definitely help speed up the process because you've got something as a basis to work off of for the future. But sometimes if people have very advanced cancers, which often are the case, if you have to have such dramatic surgery, then it might not be appropriate, or the tissues might be quite distorted. So there's pros and cons to it, I think.
Absolutely. And Christopher has asked, are they replaced regularly because of wear and tear, or does the body change during the period of time that they've been worn in?
Thank you. It's another good question. So it's a bit of both, really. So prostheses are made out of silicone, so that won't last all that long. It'll wear, tear, deteriorate, and stain. If somebody has a prosthesis that's attached by glues, then that would last something in the region of about 6 to 12 months. If it's attached by implants, then because you're not using the strong glues on the thin, fine edges, you might get a little bit longer out of it. You might get a couple of years, perhaps. But as you mentioned, if you have a prosthesis quite early on, if you're healing, it will change quite a lot. So you'll find it early on you'll need to have multiple prostheses made.
So presumably the amount of time that you could save would add up over the course of the lifetime of that many prostheses as well.
Yeah, definitely. And if you think about people who are born without a missing ear, for instance, they'll be coming to the service from, I don't know, early adulthood all the way through their life, every kind of 12 to 18 to 24 months. So it's quite a big burden on some people.
Absolutely. And so we've also had a great comment from Jorge to say, how do you manage prostheses in low-income countries? Do you suffer with patients not able to pay for treatments?
I think that is a challenge, really. And one of my supervisors is quite keen on making technology affordable. So that's why we do a lot of these investigations to try and see, okay, we've got these really great, big, expensive scanners. Do we need to use these, or is there something that's more portable and potentially cheaper that we could introduce? So we're very big on making sure that the technology that we can introduce can be used in a wide range of applications.
That's great. Yes, because I know you were talking about from the perspective of the NHS, but obviously there's so many different applications around the world.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And yes, so our final question. Might some people want a better prosthesis than the original body part?
Yeah, they might do, and it's completely up to the patient how they want that prosthesis to look and how they want the prosthesis to be made. But I suppose if we could develop some technology that automates the process and makes something that would look roughly right for that patient based on the rest of the facial features, then I'm sure it would be easy enough to just tweak things and make it look how that patient wants it to look.
Such a personal thing.
It is definitely, yes.
But yeah, so I think that's everything from our comments section for now. So thanks so much, Rachel, for taking your time this evening to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So we're going to move on now to our final speaker of the night, which is Kristine.
Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen here. I hope that's all good. So tonight I'm going to switch gears a little bit and I'm going to talk about how or if we can lose weight with exercise. And I'm a lecturer in appetite and obesity and a dietitian in the School of Psychology. And like Pete, I work in an interdisciplinary team. So we have exercise physiologists, psychologists, dietitians, all sorts of people that work in the field of appetite research in the School of Psychology. To give you a bit of a background, so energy balance or a body weight is regulated by the energy balance equation. So on one side, we have energy intake, and on the other side, we have energy expenditure. So energy intake comes from the food that we eat, so from fats, proteins, carbs, and alcohol. So they all provide calories that that our body takes in, and our energy expenditure has several components as well. But tonight I'm going to focus on the physical activity component. So that is made up of exercise, which is intentional and structured physical activity, and also non-exercise physical activity, which is kind of like activities of daily living, such as gardening, or if you do a lot of manual work in your occupation. So that's one type of physical activity that's not exercise. But what's important to take note of the energy balance is the energy balance behaviors. So on the energy intake side, it's entirely behavioral. So it's the behavior of eating that allows nutrition to exert its effects on physiology and health. So the food that we take in is entirely behavioral. So it's the act of eating. But on the energy expender side, we only have physical activity that it's a behavior that we can control. So it's really important to understand, and that's where my research comes from, is the behavior of these energy balance components. So I'll go straight to key messages of the talk, and then I'll talk to you a bit more about the details of them. But physical activity acts on both sides of the energy balance equation. So physical activity will increase energy expenditure, but physical activity will also impact energy intake and the appetite control system. And I'll talk to you about that in a few slides. And because physical activity increases energy expenditure, it helps to produce a negative energy balance and therefore reduces body fat. So yes, I'm going to answer my question. We can lose weight with exercise. And physical activity regulates the appetite control system to strengthen satiety and prevent overconsumption. So you'll see in a bit that will also impact energy intake, but it has quite an effect on the appetite control system as well. And physical inactivity or sedentariness works in the opposite way. So what we see is that when people are physically inactive, their appetite system seems to be dysregulated, and that might promote overconsumption, and that might lead to an increase in body weight. So it's really important to focus on the physical activity side and really reduce our sedentariness and our physical inactivity. So just to give you a bit more details on how physical activity will impact body composition, it improves both body composition or body weight in men and women. So we see similar effects when the exercise dosing is controlled in both men and women. So it's an effective weight management strategy. And the more exercise an individual does, the more weight is lost and the stronger the prevention of weight regain. So it seems to be a dose-response relationship. And I'll illustrate that with this figure here. So here we can see, I don't know if you'll see my pointer here, but you'll see an intervention over different months. So we have 24 months where they measured body weight. And here we see the change in body weight, so body weight loss over an intervention. And the first 6 months was a diet and physical activity intervention. And what we can see in the green line is that those people that had the higher levels of physical activity during the diet and physical activity intervention lost more weight, but were also the ones that kept it off. So there seems to be the amount that we do is really important. So the more physical activity we do, the greater the benefits. And that's actually highlighted in the WHO physical activity guidelines, and they say that if you want additional health benefits, to do greater than 300 minutes per week of moderate physical activity. But there's a catch to this. So a fixed dose of exercise does not have the same effect in all individuals. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And the average response is misleading, and it doesn't illustrate what happens on an individual level. So again, I'll illustrate this with this figure here. So what we can see here, each black line represents the change in body weight that occurred over a 12-week exercise intervention. And that was an intervention that we did in our lab at the university, and each session was supervised. So 5 days a week, they came into the lab, they wore a heart rate monitor, so we knew exactly how much exercise they did for the 12 weeks. So we knew that everyone did the same amount of exercise. But what's striking is that some people, so this individual here lost 14 kilos of body weight, but this individual here, all the way there, gained more than 2 kilos of body weight with the exercise. And you can see in the gray line, that's mainly due to fat. So there's something going on an individual level that makes people respond differently to physical activity or exercise training. So we have those people that respond really well and that can lose a clinically significant amount of weight with exercise only, but other people seem to not respond very well to physical activity exercise training. So one of our questions at the university is really understanding what makes these people respond less to exercise, and what can we do to help them achieve the weight loss that they want with exercise training. So is it maybe promoting more healthy diet, or really targeting specific behaviors that might make them reduce activity further outside their exercise sessions, or increase their intake after they exercise, for example. So we're still not sure what's going on in these individuals, but that's one of the questions that we're really interested in. So again, these differences aren't due to the fact that people are doing different exercise amounts. So these are all controlled and they're all doing the same physical activity. And there's something in terms of their physiology or their behavior that's leading to these differences in weight loss. And one of my specific areas is understanding how exercise affects mechanisms of appetite. So appetite is a really complex system, and I've recently reviewed the literature. So like Rachel, I did a systematic review, and I looked at 50 studies that looked at exercise training on appetite, and I concluded 6 different findings. So I'll go through them with you. So we see an increase in daily energy intake, so a small increase. So to us, that was not a big effect. So we had a 100-calorie increase. And if we compare that to the exercise expenditure, which is about 500 calories in most of these studies, so this increase in intake won't be fully compensated. We actually see an increase in morning hunger. So when participants are asked to rate their hunger levels in the morning, so first thing before breakfast, it actually increases. But at the same time, in response to a fixed breakfast, for example, or some sort of meal, it seems to be that their fullness levels after eating are enhanced as well. So we kind of see this increase in hunger, but also this increase in satiety after eating. On the cognitive side, we see an increase in dietary restraint. So that's kind of an intentional restriction of food to control your body weight. So we see some cognitive components of appetite come into play here. We see a decrease in uncontrolled eating. So that's kind of the opportunistic eating in an obesogenic environment or in response to emotional cues. So for example, you're overeating at a buffet or something like that. So that tends to decrease when you're more physically active. And we see a decrease in reward for high-fat foods. So your desire to eat or your attraction for high-fat food tends to decrease. But again, these are all average and it doesn't represent an individual response. And recently, I was part of a physical activity working group for the European Association for the Study of Obesity, and we were 7 groups of individuals that looked at different facets of physical activity and how it impacted health and appetite, for example, and body weight and body composition. And we produced this guide for patients to help them decide what kind of physical activity might they want to do depending on their specific goals. Because physical activity has such a wide range of benefits, specific goals might require different physical activity types, for example, or recommendations. So we have 5 different goals. And we produced this really nice guide. So if you want to scan the QR code, it will take you to the PDF of the guide. And it's a really nice 2-page that will give a lot more details of these 5 goals. So the first one is to become stronger and improve fitness. The second one is to feel better, so in terms of your appetite and your quality of life. The second goal is to protect your heart and internal organs. So we're talking about liver fat that decreases, your blood pressure, and your insulin sensitivity that improves. We have in benefits in terms of weight management, so weight loss and weight maintenance. And we also have a goal regarding the benefits of physical activity in bariatric surgery. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
I did it. It has to happen. So I'm just going to jump straight into the questions. So Christopher has said, when you say moderate physical activity, does that include walking, or is it more indicating sport and the gym?
Oh, walking definitely counts as physical activity. So you want to try to, it's not leisurely walking, for example, where you want to walk at a decent pace, but walking is a great form of physical activity. And for someone that doesn't necessarily want to run, for example, that they're not a big fan of running, walking is a great alternative. I mean, it might not be to the same level of intensity, but it's still a great form of physical activity.
And I think we've got a slightly related comment really from Amber, who says, do you do work on exercise for weight or muscle gain as opposed to just weight loss?
So in my perspective, I'm looking more at the effects of exercise on obesity, so for weight loss. But it's really important to promote muscle kind of maintenance in weight loss, because when we lose weight, we also tend to lose muscle mass because it's just the dynamics of weight loss. So in our goals, it actually promotes resistance exercise, so strengthening exercise to promote this gain of muscle to improve body composition. So on an overall level, we're thinking about weight loss, but in the kind of finer detail, we want to lose fat but actually gain muscle.
That makes sense. And then we've had a really interesting question actually from Jorge saying, how's the pandemic affected physical activity and gain of weight for citizens? I think we might know the answer.
Yeah, yes and no, because I haven't read the literature on COVID and physical activity. Actually, I'm a bit bad in that perspective. But from what I've seen on Twitter, because I follow a lot of the scientists on Twitter, is that some people working from home has actually got them to create or to be able to integrate physical activity into their lives better, because they don't have to commute. They can actually structure an exercise bout in their kind of daily life a bit better, because they're kind of at home and able to manage their schedule a bit better. But yeah, on the other end, we have lockdown and some people weren't even allowed to go outside. So you kind of see the two ends of the spectrum, in terms of some people actually took the pandemic as a really great opportunity to increase their physical activity levels. But yeah, on the other side, you might have all the restrictions and all that has reduced physical activity and increased sedentariness, because you're missing all the little bouts of walking to an office, walking to a meeting. So all these little kind of physical activity bouts that aren't exercise we're missing from our daily lives.
I suppose, yeah, it's even more important to actually appreciate what we are doing and try to increase it wherever we can.
Exactly. So we have to be a lot more intentional now in our physical activity habits to actually make sure that we are active enough.
Absolutely. So yes, once again, thank you so much for your time, Kristine.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And that brings tonight's event to a close, but thanks so much to our three speakers, so Peter, Rachel and Kristine. And I hope you've enjoyed hearing about various different facets of our bodies, from our faces to our feet, via our stomachs and some exercise. And thanks for joining us from home and sending in those questions to our speakers. We really hope you enjoyed the event. And if you did, just let us know by tweeting to us and using the hashtag BeCurious21. And we'd really welcome your feedback on tonight's event. So please let us know what you thought just by filling in a very short evaluation form, which is available at the link on the screen just about now. And our moderators will also share the link in the chat. And those of you who booked in for the session, you'll receive an email with a link again tomorrow, just in case you don't get round to it tonight. But don't forget to have a look at the rest of the programme for tomorrow, which is available at www.leeds.ac.uk/becurious. And all of the events, just like tonight, are free to attend, and we'd love to see you tomorrow. But that's it from us for now, so have a great evening, and thanks so much for joining us tonight. Goodbye, everyone.